You know that person, the one who drains energy like a phone left on full brightness, whose conversation always manages to make you question your own sanity, while somehow making themselves feel important. Toxic people are everywhere, slipping quietly into lives, friendships, workplaces, and families, leaving chaos in their wake. The funny and painfully true thing is how easily we let them occupy space, attention, and emotional energy, as if our own mental bandwidth is theirs to borrow indefinitely. Carl Jung might smile knowingly at the absurdity. Most people do not realize that these interactions are voluntary on some level, that the power they grant others comes largely from their own engagement, their own invisible consent. And the moment you start noticing this, the game changes entirely. Suddenly, the chaos that once seemed unavoidable starts to appear predictable, even laughably manageable. Toxicity thrives on engagement, on feeding from the reactions it provokes. Every eye roll, every defense, every frantic effort to argue or explain becomes nourishment. The subtle comedy here is unavoidable. We often act as if engaging will somehow fix the problem, when in reality, it only teaches the other person that we are available for their drama. Jung would describe this as a projection of unconscious disturbances onto others, an echo of unresolved conflicts and psychological imbalance. And the irony is that the more serious we take their antics, the more they succeed. Humor emerges naturally when you step back and watch the dance. People contorting, twisting, reacting in ways that are amusing in their predictability, yet taken far too seriously by all participants. The first secret, though deceptively simple, is profound: presence without reaction. Toxic people avoid those who inhabit themselves fully, who respond from awareness rather than impulse. When you stop feeding the drama, when you cease to react with fear, guilt, or anger, you shift the balance entirely. The dynamic changes. They no longer have easy access to your energy because you refuse to provide it. The comedy appears subtly in the juxtaposition. While others engage in exhausting battles over imagined slights, the quietly aware individual navigates interactions with ease, amusement, and calm, often leaving the drama-starved toxic person floundering in their own chaos. Next comes understanding boundaries, not the rigid, defensive kind that isolates you entirely, but a fluid awareness of where your energy, attention, and consent begin and end. Jung would point out that toxic people rarely respect boundaries unless they are consistently enforced. The humor here lies in the revelation that most people create endless excuses for tolerating violation, chaos, and manipulation, acting as if the inconvenience is noble or inevitable. The quietly aware person, however, learns that boundaries are less about confrontation and more about presence, a subtle energy that communicates, without words, "I am not available for chaos." It's the psychic equivalent of walking into a room with invisible force fields that only the attuned can feel. Another crucial insight is the recognition of patterns. Toxic individuals rarely emerge randomly. They exhibit familiar behavioral rhythms, manipulation tactics, and emotional triggers. Observing without judgment transforms fear into clarity. Humor naturally emerges here. The more predictable their antics become, the more absurd they seem when replayed internally. The frantic energy once invested in reacting is replaced with a light, almost mischievous awareness. You can see the setup before it even begins, anticipate the emotional tug-of-war, and simply choose not to engage. This is not avoidance and cowardice. It is mastery of presence and energy. Detachment also plays a vital role. When you cease to identify with provocations, guilt traps, or emotional manipulations, the toxicity has nowhere to land. Jung emphasizes the importance of differentiating your authentic self from projections and unconscious disturbances of others. The funny part is how often people unknowingly participate in their own exhaustion, handing over attention and emotional weight as if it were a paycheck to a demanding, invisible boss. By choosing not to participate, you subtly communicate strength, stability, and self-possession, qualities that naturally repel toxic individuals. Even the smallest moments of subtle mastery matter. Maintaining calm in a heated conversation, observing a passive-aggressive remark without internalizing it, or simply disengaging from gossip. All act as signals that your energy is not available. Humor threads through these victories effortlessly. The exaggerated attempts of toxic people to provoke a reaction, countered by the serene non-reaction, often feels like watching a cartoon villain fume while the hero sips tea, completely unbothered. The subtle irony reinforces the principle. Energy is the currency of interaction, and those who prey on chaos avoid accounts that are already full, balanced, and non-reactive. Finally, the first stage of mastery is internal. Presence, boundaries, pattern recognition, and detachment all converge to create a state of calm authority. The toxic cannot access you because you have reclaimed your own center. Humor and irony continue to play a natural role. The very people who once dominated your attention now appear almost absurd in their insistence, as if the universe has handed you the script and allowed you to laugh at the performance. This internal mastery does not require confrontation, manipulation, or resistance. It requires observation, patience, and alignment with your authentic self. By the end of this first act, you begin to notice a subtle shift in every interaction. Conversations become lighter, conflicts less urgent, and the frantic energy that once consumed your mind begins to dissipate. The world does not change, but your perception does. The power of the secret, the quiet, unspoken, and almost invisible mastery, is that it protects your energy, restores calm, and renders manipulation ineffective. Humor is embedded in the realization. While toxic patterns persist around you, their impact diminishes, leaving you free to inhabit life fully, without drama or exhaustion. Once you start observing the psychology behind toxic interactions, the absurdity becomes almost laughable. Toxic people operate through patterns, emotional triggers, and projection, yet most of us have been trained to respond automatically, as if their behavior were a personal assault rather than a reflection of their own inner chaos. Jung would point out that these individuals are projecting unresolved conflicts, insecurities, and shadows, often from childhood or deep psychological patterns, onto anyone who will absorb them. And the subtle, almost comical truth is that we are willing participants in this drama, handing over attention, energy, and emotional bandwidth as if it were our job to repair the world. The first step in dismantling this dynamic is awareness. The moment you begin noticing the signals, the repeated manipulations, and the emotional tug-of-war, you start reclaiming agency. Every sigh, snide remark, or veiled insult is now recognized for what it is, a predictable pattern rather than an attack on your character. Humor naturally appears here. The more predictable the manipulations, the more absurd they seem when replayed in your mind. You may even find yourself quietly amused at the choreography of chaos, the intricate little dances that toxic people perform, all in an attempt to elicit reactions. The shift is subtle but powerful. Once you stop participating unconsciously, the influence diminishes. Next comes the subtle art of emotional detachment. Toxic people feed on reaction, the fear, guilt, frustration, or anger they provoke. Once you stop reacting automatically, they lose their power. Watts would describe this as flowing with life rather than resisting it. Jung would describe it as differentiating the self from projections. By observing without internalizing, by responding consciously rather than emotionally, you establish an internal immunity. The comedy is inevitable. What once felt like a storm in a teacup now appears as a small, self-contained squall that can barely touch your calm. You are no longer drawn into the drama, and the toxic individual often flounders, frustrated that their old methods no longer work. Boundaries become essential in this process. Not rigid walls, but flexible, clear limits that signal your energy and attention are not available for exploitation. Setting boundaries doesn't require confrontation or aggression. It requires presence and consistency. The subtly funny aspect is how often people complain about toxic influence while simultaneously leaving every door open, over-explaining, or negotiating endlessly with the same people who repeatedly disrespect them. Observing this contrast, you realize that mastery is quiet and almost invisible. It is the calm refusal to engage in chaos, the effortless alignment with your own energy rather than theirs. Pattern recognition is another powerful tool. Toxic behavior rarely arises spontaneously. It is consistent, repetitive, and predictable. Recognizing triggers, understanding motivations, and anticipating manipulations allow you to respond with equanimity rather than reflex. Humor naturally threads through this realization. The dramatic displays, the petty provocations, the frantic attempts to provoke, once viewed as recurring motifs rather than personal attacks, they begin to resemble the antics of a cartoon villain, always failing, always theatrical, always predictable. You watch without judgment, respond without reaction, and suddenly, the chaos loses its gravity. Psychologically, toxic people target those who are unaware of their own energy and presence. Jung emphasized that projection occurs when the observer's boundaries are weak or fluid. When someone is fully aligned with their authentic self, calmly observing, and unconcerned with external validation, toxic individuals are repelled. They avoid people who cannot be manipulated because their usual strategies, guilt traps, provocation, flattery, or intimidation, fail. The subtly funny irony is that the very qualities toxic people seek to exploit, attention, engagement, and energy, become shields when withheld. Presence becomes armor, calmness becomes deterrent, and the drama simply passes through without leaving a mark. Even minor moments of mastery have outsized effects. Remaining calm during an insult, silently disengaging from gossip, or refusing to react to subtle provocations sends a clear, unspoken message. Toxic individuals instinctively sense when someone cannot be dominated and often retreat without confrontation. Humor appears naturally. The frantic energy once devoted to protecting oneself or correcting the other now becomes unnecessary, and watching the tiny power plays collapse under their own absurdity is quietly satisfying. Mastery is not about aggression. It is about serene alignment, subtle authority, and strategic inattention. Awareness, boundaries, detachment, and pattern recognition converge into a state of effortless mastery. The energy that once fueled manipulation now returns to you, creating a sense of calm authority and inner space. You notice the ridiculousness of the drama around you, and your own life begins to move forward without interruption. Humor continues to surface subtly. The frantic antics of those still caught in chaos contrast sharply with the lightness of your presence. What once felt overwhelming now feels manageable, almost playful, as if life is a stage and you have quietly stepped out of the rehearsal of other people's scripts. The final piece is internal alignment. Toxic people cannot affect you if you are anchored in yourself, aware of your boundaries, and attuned to your own energy. It doesn't matter whether the chaos swirls around you, whether gossip spreads, or whether provocations continue. Your center remains untouched, your awareness intact, and your energy reclaimed. Humor persists naturally, because observing the futile attempts of toxic people to provoke you is both satisfying and amusing. The very presence that once invited manipulation now radiates subtle authority, effortlessly repelling chaos without force. By the end of this second act, the shift is clear. Interactions no longer drain you, conflicts are navigable, and energy is protected. The world around you may remain chaotic, toxic patterns persist in others, but your relationship to them transforms completely. Observation, detachment, boundaries, and presence create an invisible shield that is both subtle and impenetrable. Humor, calmness, and self-alignment thread through every interaction, turning formerly stressful encounters into neutral, even entertaining experiences. The stage is set for full liberation, the final stage where you inhabit life without fear, without reactive energy, and without allowing toxic individuals to influence your equilibrium. The ultimate mastery, the secret that makes toxic people hesitate and even avoid you, is surprisingly simple. Inhabit yourself fully. Presence is not a skill you can fake or a tactic you can deploy. It is a state of being. When your attention is anchored, your energy is aligned, and your boundaries are clear, the chaos around you loses its gravity. You begin to notice the absurdity of patterns that once dominated your emotional life. the guilt trips, the manipulations, the emotional storms. Humor threads through these observations naturally. The frantic, over-the-top efforts of toxic individuals to control, provoke, or manipulate appear almost cartoonish when viewed from a grounded, centered perspective. Their drama no longer commands the spotlight in your mind. It becomes background noise, amusing in its persistence, irrelevant in its impact. This freedom is not achieved by fighting, confronting, or arguing. It comes from alignment. Jung emphasized that projection occurs when you are unaware of your own energy and presence. The moment you anchor yourself, your energy becomes less penetrable. Observing without internalizing, responding without reacting, and maintaining calm while others flail is deceptively powerful. The subtly funny part is how often this quiet mastery is more effective than confrontation. Toxic people cannot provoke the person who is not participating, and they quickly move on to easier prey. What once felt like a constant battle transforms into effortless sovereignty over your own emotional life. Humor continues to play a natural role in this transformation. Once you stop taking their chaos personally, the mental energy that once fed fear, anxiety, and irritation becomes available for creativity, connection, and presence. The irony of the situation often hits you. You spent years feeling controlled, manipulated, or drained by people who, in reality, are merely acting out patterns that have nothing to do with you. Now, observing without reaction, you can smile inwardly at the elaborate theatrics, the desperate attempts to elicit control, and the utterly predictable nature of their behavior. The inner amusement is subtle but powerful. It further erodes any remaining grip of toxicity. Boundaries, previously established through observation and detachment, now operate seamlessly. They are not rigid walls, but subtle, consistent indicators of your availability, your energy, and your consent. Toxic people instinctively detect these signals: the calm, aligned presence, the refusal to react, the energy that cannot be hijacked. Jung's insights illuminate the subtle genius of this approach. By maintaining internal equilibrium, you repel external chaos without confrontation, manipulation, or aggression. The quiet humor lies in watching those who once dominated your attention flounder, confused, and frustrated because their usual tactics no longer work. The next insight is that mastery is cumulative. Every interaction where you remain centered, calm, and non-reactive strengthens your internal authority. Each time you notice the pattern, maintain your boundaries, and refuse to engage unnecessarily, you reinforce the signal that your energy is not available for exploitation. Humor naturally emerges in the pattern recognition. The more predictable the toxic behavior, the more amusing it becomes when juxtaposed with your calm, unmoved presence. What once seemed overwhelming now appears manageable, almost playful, as if life itself has conspired to teach subtle resilience through repeated scenarios. Emotional mastery consolidates all previous steps. You no longer expend energy on fear, guilt, or irritation, because these responses are consciously withheld. The psychic space previously occupied by toxic influence becomes available for joy, creativity, and engagement. Humor continues to surface, not forced, but inherent in observation. The very tactics that once drained you now become almost comical in their futility. You walk through interactions lightly, aware, and aligned, observing patterns while remaining unshaken. The subtle authority this creates is magnetic. Toxic people detect it and almost instinctively steer clear. The final element is self-alignment. Presence, awareness, boundaries, detachment, and humor converge into a state of effortless sovereignty over your inner life. The chaos around you continues. People argue, manipulate, and provoke, but it no longer dictates your thoughts, emotions, or energy. Humor continues naturally. The absurdity of repeated manipulations, the exaggerated seriousness with which others take their own drama, and the contrast between frantic chaos and your calm observation all reinforce the freedom you now inhabit. This is mastery not in action but in being, a quiet, magnetic presence that is impossible to manipulate. Ultimately, the soothing solution is simple and elegant. Cultivate presence, reclaim your energy, maintain clear boundaries, observe patterns, and allow a subtle amusement at the absurdity of human drama. Toxic people avoid those who are aligned because their usual tools, provocation, guilt, manipulation, are ineffective. You do not need to fight, control, or even consciously repel them. Your presence alone is sufficient. Life becomes lighter, interactions become more authentic, and energy that was once consumed by drama now flows naturally into fulfillment, creativity, and connection. The final reflection is this: the power to neutralize toxic influence has always been within you. You don't need confrontation, anger, or force. You need alignment, awareness, and subtle authority. By inhabiting yourself fully, maintaining boundaries, observing patterns, and allowing quiet amusement, you reclaim not just control over interactions, but sovereignty over your own life. The world may remain chaotic, but you navigate it with calm, effortless clarity. The people who once drained your energy no longer hold sway, and freedom from manipulation and drama becomes a natural byproduct of presence. Humor, awareness, and internal authority guide you forward, creating a life that is calm, joyful, and deeply fulfilling. In the end, mastery is not a skill, it is a state of being. By reclaiming your energy and presence, toxic people avoid you, but more importantly, you avoid giving them any space to influence your life. You are no longer an actor in someone else's drama. You are the quiet, aligned observer who walks through the world with calm authority, subtle amusement, and complete freedom.